Underwood Xtreme Defender 9mm+P versus 45 ACP+P. So our 9mm is a 90 grain Xtreme Defender rated at 1475 feet per second. Our 45 ACP is a 135 grain Xtreme Defender rated at 1335 feet per second. And like I said, both of these are +P. So I'm going to test these in my short barrels today. So I'm going to use my 3.2 inch Taurus G2C to test the 9mm+P and my 3.3 inch Smith & Wesson Shield 45 to test the 45 ACP. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. No rib simulation in the way that can potentially slow down its penetration. No fabric in a way, even though it's kind of redundant with this type of test. And see what our best potential is for what kind of damage they cause and all that. Then I'm going to move on to doing more of our real world simulation that I do with pretty much every other round of ammo, hollow points included. 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh. So when you're talking 3 inches and 16 inches, it's more like 1.5 inches and 8 inches in a real living target. So this really represents about a 9.5 inch thick individual with ribs on the front and the back. So we'll do a plain clear ballistic shot, then a real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 9mm+P rated at 1475 feet per second. I don't know the barrel length they used to get that, but it's probably a lot longer than this 3.2 inch barrel here. So let's see how close I get to 1475 feet per second in my Taurus G2C here. 1400, 1343, 1406, 1347, 1339. So yeah, quite a bit below that rate of velocity. Now 1335 feet per second is the rating on this 45 ACP+P, 135 grain. So let's see how close I get to 1335 feet per second out of my Shield 45 here. No read. 1188, 1152, 1115, 1108, 1144 out of ammo there. So yeah, the first shot I pulled it way down and to the left. That's just me. You know, weird things happen when you wear gloves and you're not used to them. But yeah, quite a bit below that rated velocity there. So let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, we're going to do our plain clear ballistic shot, also known as our best potential shot. There's no rib simulation in the way that could potentially slow down its penetration. There's no fabric in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point if they were a hollow point. These are not hollow points, but I like to stay consistent, so I will use the fabric when I move on to our real world simulation. So let's see what we get here with our 9mm in the plain clear ballistics. All right. Now let's hit with that with our 45 ACP. Let's go take a look. All right, so one of those channels, the 45 came kind of close to that 9mm channel, didn't really intersect it, but it came very close. But you can see there, right about where they came close, that 45 tumbled for sure, because the bullet is backwards, and these type of bubbling marks are from tumbling 100%. So that's what we're seeing here. So our energy dump in our first 3-inch piece here, 9mm on the bottom, 45 on top, a little bit more with our 45. But once we enter this block, you know, this happened last time I tested these. They have about the same amount of damage right here, and you can say, well, the 9mm is greater. It's not. It's the same size up on top of the 45, but it's horizontal rather than the, vertical, so it doesn't look as wide. But both those channels are about the same as each other. Both of these bullets are backwards, which would definitely indicate they tumbled at least at some point. So our 9mm, we went right to 16.5 inches with our 9mm. With our 45 ACP+P, we went to 17.75 inches. So they didn't over penetrate, and that's a good thing here. So, you know, they did an okay amount of damage and didn't over penetrate. So that's very consistent to see. So let's put on our fabric, put on our rib simulation, and do our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation: 4 layers of sweatshirt material, followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Let's see how our 9mm+P does. All right. You know, let me give one more shot here. Not arced down. So let me try to make it go straight if I can. All right. And our 45 ACP+P. Let's go take a look. All right, so those paths are close again, but they did not intersect. That's weird on that bottom one. You know, I'm not shooting, I'm not angling down. A lot of people say I am because the parallax makes it look like that. That's why I lower my knees so that the pistol is straight. But sometimes these widescreen camera lenses that stretch a little bit show these weird angles. But I assure you, I'm shooting under the straight, and you know, that did seem to kind of, once it hit this, want to arc down. That could be a result of tumbling through the MDF, and that amount of damage right there could say that too. But let's take a look here at our rib simulation. And you know, it's kind of hard to say because the second shot hit really close. It doesn't necessarily look like it's tumbling through, but I could be wrong. I can't tell. Now with our 45, it definitely is a little bit, because that's a little bit oblong of a hole. And yeah, this is that thing, I'm seeing a lot of tumbling damage that's similar to the type of stuff you see where you see a wide pattern and it shrinks, and you see a wide pattern and it shrinks back down, and it gets wide again, like in this first shot with the 45. That's kind of what happens. And bullets are tumbling, and both of these bullets are backwards, so how can you say that they're not? Our 9mm hit our back rib simulation. So, okay damage in there. Once we got to about the 6-inch mark, we tumbled around quite a bit. And I have seen these things in slow motion in other people's videos. And like, if you take a FMJ and you shoot it, it'll come to about this far and then start to tumble. The Xtreme Defender will come to about this far and then start to tumble. It does pretty much the same thing as an FMJ. It just does it at an earlier point. And I get a lot of hate for telling that, but that's the truth, and this is what's happening. But with our 9mm, we went right to our back rib simulation, which is 19 inches of penetration. Pretty good damage. Now with our 45, honestly the track is smaller, which would mean it's probably tumbling maybe a little bit less here, I don't know. But what we got going on here is 15.5 inches of penetration. So looking at this purely as a penetration number thing going on here, where we're trying to not get over penetration, trying to stay, you know, 12 to 18 inches with like FBI and other protocols. Our 45 matched that a little bit better because our 9mm through our real world simulation went a little bit deep. That being said, hitting the back rib simulation isn't a fail. You know, it's not going to pass through an average size attacker, and you know, that's what I'm trying to see here. That's what I'm trying to do, is get bullets to stay within that back rib simulation and not pass through. Not because I'm concerned about somebody on the other side of somebody, that whole old wives' tale thing, not that reason, but because if you pass through, you're not putting that energy into the target, using it in a way that could be productive to stop a threat, like hollow point expansion or tumbling or whatever like that. And this right here, those flutes do cause a little tumbling. They could cause a little inward pressure that you know, starts that process. I'm not really sure about exactly how they're supposed to work, but as far as penetration goes, they're not bad, and honestly, they're not bad options. I would rather have a jacket at hollow point. That's just me, just because you can count on that expansion opening up. You can count on a big hollow point cutting. With these, you're getting a similar size, because when you tilt that bullet sideways via tumbling, you know, the height of that bullet is as wide as a jacketed hollow point. So that's why you get this like not so big channel here, and then back small again because it's moving straight again. And sometimes they'll do it again. So they're not terrible, but they're just not as consistent as jacketed hollow points, in my opinion. And that's not hate on this, I'm just telling the truth about what I'm seeing. So let's pull these out of the block, we'll take a close-up look at them, and then I'll shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. Alright, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through play and gel, our 9mm and our 45 ACP. So our 9mm, obviously there's no change to these bullets because they don't expand or anything like that, and copper, solid copper is relatively hard, so it has a concave base on that 9mm. Now, interesting thing about our 45 here is the 45 has a completely hollow base. You know, I don't know why that is, other than, you know, the only thing I can think of is you're going to reduce your case capacity, so you can put a lighter bullet a little bit deeper in the case, and that's probably what they're doing with that. I don't really know why. Obviously, no change to those bullets there. Now, one's going through our real world simulation. Again, there's not going to be any change to these bullets because MDF isn't really going to do anything to these. I mark them with a marker so you can tell which ones went through the MDF, but other than that, there's no change. There's nothing different about these. There's our 45. So they're a cool looking bullet. They're probably expensive to make, but no change to them. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target. So the reason why I do 14 yards partly is because you're supposed to stay 10 yards away from steel targets to be safe, unless you angle them back. I don't angle them back, so I like to stay at least 10 yards away so you don't get hit with spalling or ricochets. But also the other reason why I do 14 yards because it's double 7 yards. And in my mind, if 7 yards is the distance you're supposed to train from, you know, your average self-defense scenario, I feel like 14 yards, you double that distance, it kind of makes it as if it were 7 yards with adrenaline, if that makes any sense. Because I feel like with adrenaline, you're going to be half as good as what you would be on the range. So making the distance twice as far, making that challenge twice as difficult, simulates a real-world simulation situation, in my opinion. So let's see how I can do it with our 9mm from 14 yards. I'm just going to get a front sight picture and pop these off as fast as I think I can hit the target. All right, so kind of all over the place there, and that would be kind of realistic in a real defensive situation. Not super easy to control, you know, with that pistol and that ammo. It does have a bit of muzzle jump. 45, let's see what this does. I have absolutely no idea how I missed that first one. It's got to be me because I made the last 4 there. But you know, when it gets to be like 19 degrees out like it is today, and you're cold and you're sweating at the same time, and these are excuses, but they're reasonable excuses. Sometimes it's just hard to be that good, but that's fine with me. I like it as difficult as possible to try to, you know, simulate more adrenaline going on. So let me back it up to 40 yards and see how these do from a little more distance. All right, 40 yards from the target. So, you know, people say this is not particularly realistic, but Eli Dickin did stop a threat from 42 yards. He stopped a mall shooter from 42 yards with a Glock 19 pistol. And I read that the ammo he used was Blazer brass, I believe it said, which I don't know for sure whether that would be Full Metal Jacket or not. because I think some Blazer brass does now make jacket hollow points, but it's likely full metal jacket, Blazer brass, 42 yards, Glock 19. So to me, you know, this is kind of why I do this stuff, is because I like to look at ammo, and maybe there's more accurate ammo. It might do better at distance, and a lot of times jacket hollow points, for instance, are more accurate at distance, and even at distance they're going to stop threats a little bit better. So that's kind of why I do all this. So including something like this with better ammo that I think people should be carrying, I think that's realistic. So I'm just going to get a front sight picture and fire kind of slow and see if I can hit this target. So 9mm+P. So on that miss, I did feel myself jerk that trigger, so that was definitely all me. And has nothing to do with my gloves this time, it's just, that's just me. So 45 ACP+P. See what I can do with this. So this ammo, I actually really like that ammo in this pistol because being a 135 grain, the recoil is very similar to a typical, let's say a 147 grain 9mm, something like that. So a lot less muzzle flip and a lot less recoil than typical. So honestly, it's not a bad round of ammunition for this. And you know, the benefits to rounds like this are partially hard barrier penetration. They will mushroom quite a bit less when they go through like auto glass or thin steel versus a lot of jacketed hollow points, just because they're made out of copper. And TAC XP hollow points will actually do similar things to this, where they don't want to mushroom out huge after going through a hard barrier. Now, after you go through a hard barrier, the flutes themselves will flatten and mushroom out. So once they hit a target, they're not going to do this whole thing where, you know, tumbling or inward pressure or whatever. But they will go through without deforming so much, so they will go deeper after going through a hard barrier versus a lot of lead core ammunition. So that's an advantage and a benefit to stuff like this. So I'm trying to warm up to this ammo. I really am. I'm trying to find as much data as I can on it. I can't find a whole lot of data on like how they work. I have a lot of people that tell me, like, my cousin shot a hog with one from a rifle, and it doesn't really tell me a whole lot because pretty much any bullet from a rifle is going to do pretty well. Or, you know, and also, you know, they made a good shot placement from a handgun, a Magnum handgun on a hog. Well, that doesn't tell me a whole lot either, because you could use pretty much any ammo for that, you know. But looking at like a more in-depth study is what I would like to see how well they stop threats. And until you have like law enforcement, like big departments taking them up where you can get a significant amount of real world data, it's kind of hard to say. So I don't think it's wrong to be skeptical of something that there isn't data on. And I think it's irresponsible to be like, well, Lehigh says these are as good as hollow points, they'll do as much damage. Like, well, how do we know that? So I'm being skeptical until I get that data. But as far as how they perform overall, you know, we got deep penetration, not over penetration. So I could say based on that, they're better than a full metal jacket. And they seem to be pretty accurate as well. So they're not a bad option. I don't think they're as good as jacketed hollow points, because the jacketed hollow point, there's measurable expansion pedals you can measure. And if you can measure, you know, a 1/2 inch hole, well, then you know a 1/2 inch hole went through most of that target. With this, you can't really say any more than the diameter size went through, unless you want to count the height of it tumbling. But anyways, I'll leave it to you guys to decide what you think about this ammo. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.